So there's a new law of the land in California, and accessory dwelling units are no longer the only game in town. So SB 9 is a new law in California that's going to give a lot of powers to California homeowners starting in January 2022. There's two big parts to the law. One lets you develop a second house with an existing house, and the other part lets you split lots under the right conditions into two separate lots. And if you combine both of those, you could potentially build 4 units of housing, 2 on each lot. That's a lot, pun intended. So this new law is going to let homeowners build significantly more and do a lot more with their property. We're going to talk about that first part, building second house. We're going to talk about the second part, lot splits. We're going to talk about how they overlap and how they might combine or overlap with accessory dwelling unit laws. And then we're going to talk a bit about some frequently asked questions that I've just been getting a lot. Just like the accessory dwelling unit laws, there are a lot of details that still need to be worked out. These are statewide laws that affect the code, but then the code is enforced at a local level and there are local ordinances that interact with the state law. Sometimes the state law supersedes, sometimes it doesn't. And so this is a work in progress. I'm going to be talking to stakeholders at a state and local level for months, trying to figure out how exactly the rubber meets the road on this. But in the meantime, I'm going to share everything I learn on this channel. And my hope is that you know that this is a work in progress. You know that the ultimate decider in your specific case is always going to be your specific jurisdiction's planning department, building department. This is all general advice based on what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing and my own read of the laws. And then starting in January, we're going to start seeing real-world applications of SB 9, and that's going to be when we learn the most. All right, so let's start with the duplex part of the law, or the second unit part of the law. Right now, if your lot is zoned for just one single-family residence, this state law says you now have the ability to propose 2 units of housing on that same lot. So if the lot was only zoned for 1 unit, it is now possible to build 2 units. But there are a lot of carve-outs and details and qualifiers to that statement. So first and foremost, it's only urban lots as designated in the census. This is pretty lenient. It's most of the cities and suburbs that you would imagine can be developed, but a very good first step is to check whether your lot is eligible because it's an urban lot. If you're out in the boonies or you have a little lake house or something, there's a very good chance that you're going to find this law wasn't designed for you. Secondly, I keep saying it has to be zoned for single-family residence, and no matter how many times I say this, people say, oh, what if I'm R2, what if I'm R3, what if I'm, all these different zoning codes. So instead of writing a law that enumerated every single type of zoning, like R1, R2, R3, RA, RL, instead, the law just says, if the lot is zoned for a single-family residence, 1 single-family unit, it is now possible to propose 2 units. A third big carve-out is that HOAs can still make rules that prohibit the use of SB 9. So if you're in an HOA, this doesn't really exist for you. I mean, you might be able to use it if the HOA is friendly or absent, but if the HOA wants to play hardball, they have the legal grounds to make your life very difficult and to stop this project from happening. If there's fire or seismic hazard, and the city is willing to go on record with a preponderance of evidence, that's a word in the law, I get to keep saying preponderance, then they can stop this project. It's not really designed, everybody wants this housing to be safe, and so the lawmakers took a pretty conservative stance toward the language that allows local agencies to say no on the basis of fire or seismic hazard. If you're in a historic district, your property is a historic landmark, you're on the historic register at any level, city, county, state, this isn't really designed for you. And so there will be a lot of carve-outs for historic districts where you just won't be able to use SB 9. There are also a lot of tenant protections in place. So if you have a tenant in a single-family unit and you want to use SB 9 in a way that would displace that tenant, there's a lot of restrictions that you should look into. For one, if it would disrupt an affordability covenant, if it would disrupt a rent control agreement or law, if it would displace a 3+ year tenant, and if you've used the Ellis Act in the past like 15 years or something longer like that, then this law is not designed for you. So then there are restrictions around how much of the exterior walls you can affect at once in order to protect any tenant who's currently living in that unit. And interestingly for this channel, if your lot already has an accessory dwelling unit or a junior accessory dwelling unit, then those units count toward the total number of units that you're allowed. So if you have a house and an ADU, you're technically speaking already at 2 units on that lot. So the city can count that unit toward the unit total and say you're already at the 2 unit maximum for your lot. Now, if you have a property that meets all those conditions, and there are millions of you, then congratulations. You can probably propose 2 units on your lot now. Now let's talk about lot splits. What's so interesting about Section 2 of the law is that it is going to allow you to split your lot into 2 lots that can be sold separately. So the thing about ADUs, right, is you can't sell them separately. They're an accessory to the primary structure, and it's very hard to convey them separately. With these lot splits, you are expressly allowed to sell the lot separately, and that's pretty exciting. It opens up a lot of avenues. At the same time, there are more restrictions on the lot splits than there are on the construction of the second units that we just talked about in the first part of the video. So all of the restrictions that we just talked about for second units apply to lot splits as well. In addition, there is an owner-occupancy requirement and a bunch of rules about the lot splitting. There is a 3-year owner-occupancy requirement that you sign an affidavit that says you plan on living in one of the units on these 2 properties for 3 years. The split needs to be roughly equal, like 50-50. The farthest you can get is 40-60. The law is built that way so that people don't end up with like a tiny parcel like engulfed in a giant parcel. In addition, the resulting lots need to be over 1,200 square feet. So if you've got a tiny lot in San Francisco that's less than 2,400 square feet, you're probably not going to be able to split it. On top of that, the resulting lots need to have access to the public right-of-way. A lot of the time where they're shaped kind of like a flag, it's like the back lot with a little strip that reaches out to the road. There's also a provision in there that says you're not supposed to SB 9 split adjacent lots. So you couldn't like buy 3 properties on a street and SB 9 all of them. You could split the non-adjacent ones, but not the one in the middle. And then you can't do like infinitely recursive splits. Once you've split a lot with SB 9 into 2 lots, you cannot split one of those resulting lots again with SB 9. Even if you could with the other rules, it's just you're allowed to do it once, not twice. But so you can see why this is exciting. A lot of people are going to be able to use this law to split off part of their property, and now you own 2 lots, and you can sell those lots separately. There's an owner-occupancy requirement, so you should live on one of them, but the other one is suddenly up for grabs, and that's really interesting. Now, you could combine these 2 laws. You could have your house on a big lot, you split the lot in half, and you build 3 new units. So you've got 2 units on each lot, and that's suddenly you're looking at 4 units where you only had 1 house before. And that's exciting, right? Everybody sees the potential there. If you can make the investment, that's really exciting. If you cannot make the investment, then consider doing the lot split and selling the virgin lot to a developer or to another homeowner who wants to build a house. And then you use that money to finance the ADU's production in your backyard. You don't have to bring cash to the table, you're bringing land to the table. There's a lot of potential there. How does this overlap with accessory dwelling units? So ADUs and JADUs count toward the unit total for SB 9. And there's provisions in SB 9 that say, notwithstanding all the stuff it says about how cities have to give you an ADU, if you use SB 9, you no longer have to also approve an ADU. The language is set up so that a city that wants to limit development can say, hey, you either get an ADU or you get an SB 9. You don't get both. But if a city wants to allow both, it still can. And so I would expect some friendly cities to say, hey, yeah, you can still combine these judiciously, and we'll see. We'll see how it actually gets implemented. If a city's particularly friendly, and you're in a high transit corridor and they're like, no, this is a golden opportunity to develop more housing, they might potentially allow you to split your lot into 2 different lots, and then on each one you build a first unit and a second unit and an ADU or something like that. One could imagine. But the law itself doesn't lay that blanket out for everybody. The intent of the law is to allow for 2 units per lot, and ADUs and JADUs count toward that total of 2. You could also imagine, people keep asking me, like, what's the most you could put on a unit, even in the cities that are restrictive, because they keep hearing media reports where people say 8 to 10 units. It's not 8 to 10. I can't personally find a way to make 8 to 10. The law's written pretty explicitly to be like 4, 2 per lot, and you can have 2 lots, so it's 4. I did find one way where if you had a huge lot, like if you have a 10,000 and you use normal subdivision rules to make it 2 5,000 lots, so you have a 10,000 lot, you split it into 2 5,000 lots with normal subdivision rules, not SB 9. Then you use SB 9 to split this one into 2 2,500 square foot lots. You cannot use the SB 9 on both because of the no adjacent lots clause. But now you've got 3 lots, and each of them could have 2 units, so you could get up to 6 in a restrictive jurisdiction if you started with a giant lot, and if you got the subdivision without SB 9 permitted. But that's a lot of ifs. Another thing that keeps coming up is, what if you already have an accessory dwelling unit? Can you now split it off and sell it separately? And we're not sure. We've asked the lawmakers to clarify their position on this. And I think it's just a good example of, like, we're going to find out how this works as the cities decide to actually implement the policy and then communicate back with the state lawmakers, the HCD, and we just have to figure that out. Off the top of my head, like, you're going to have to separate the utilities, I think, because right now you're probably connected through the same utility connection as the main house. The ADU laws specifically say you can't convey an ADU separately. So maybe you need to convert the ADU into an SB 9 house, or whatever the language we're going to adopt becomes. I don't know, is the short answer. So just another good example of how this is a work in progress from the lawmaker's perspective, and the early adopters are going to have to work with the city and the state enforcement agencies to figure this stuff out. If you have an ADU and you are a good candidate to split it off, I would be very interested in chatting. Email me at ryan@howtoadu.com, because we should talk. I want test cases. I want to get early exposure to how the laws are being implemented. So, I'll cut you a good deal. Another thing that people constantly ask about is tax implications, and we're going to see. I've heard 2 different takes on this, which is always a bad sign. So my advice is always talk to the county tax assessor about how they're going to treat your lot and your situation. Generally speaking, property taxes are reassessed at a transfer of ownership. So if you split your lot, but you still are the owner of both lots, you were the owner before and you're still the owner after, the new lots should not have to be reassessed. And if you bought that property 30 years ago, you probably don't want them reassessed. So that's good news. If you bought the property yesterday, you probably do want the lots reassessed, because one of them is half the size it used to be. In terms of units, what's been happening on ADUs is that the new construction gets assessed at completion, and your property taxes are based on the current assessed value of that new unit, but that does not trigger a reassessment of the old unit. I imagine that things will work in a similar way with SB 9 units. This is a playlist of much shorter videos that just rattle through the frequently asked questions I've been getting. You're going to want to binge watch that if you're seriously considering a lot split or a second unit. And here's more information about the laws behind ADUs and SB 9 if you want a deeper dive into that.